Honorable Member for Laver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in this Parliament during a very sad and solemn moment in our existence as a country. And before I get down to business with my brief remarks in this Parliament today, Mr. Speaker, I want to join my parliamentary colleagues in expressing our profound condolences to the families that lost loved ones in our diaspora. No doubt, during some of my trips to the United Nations and holding town hall meetings, I would have interacted with a number of St. Lucians who are touched in a very profound way by this pandemic. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it strikes very, very, very close to home. Very close to home, Mr. Speaker, that if I may say that even relatives of mine were affected in a very direct way by COVID-19. A brother and a nephew of mine, thank God they are recuperating from the COVID-19 virus in New York, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, it is also a sad and solemn occasion to come to this chamber at this time when we are supposed to be organizing ourselves into that integrated whole to manage the conversation and to manage that very delicate period. That I come here and it's business as usual, attacking the opposition. Attacking the opposition for what? For honest opinion, Mr. Speaker. We represent people and we come to this chamber to give voice to the concerns in a very responsible way. And our contributions are being dismissed as if we have no right to come to this chamber and speak, Mr. Speaker. I do not believe we should approach this season in that spirit of needless confrontation. Just the member for Beaufort North indicating about the checkpoints and about toilets are not available when we're supposed to be accentuating washing of hands over running water. That's a very simple response. When the Prime Minister was summing up, the Prime Minister could simply say, well, there were some delays in getting it there, or we have actually ordered it and it's on its way. But don't dismiss a legitimate concern, Mr. Speaker. But you see, Mr. Speaker, that is just the nature of things. I remember the last sitting of Parliament, I did not have the opportunity to speak to the issue of COVID-19 in this Honorable House. And so, by observing all the protocols from my home, I took to Facebook to communicate with my constituents, and of course St. Lucians both at home and abroad. I encourage them not to stereotype in this environment. In the absence of any effective vaccine and a cure, please listen to the authorities, follow all the health protocols, and encourage them to do the right thing. And I led by example, Mr. Speaker, that anybody who did not live with me will not come into the house. My son, who lives in a different section, sometimes goes out, comes back, say, look, stay in your section. Just so that we observe the protocol, and I encourage everybody to try to deal with this business of our country in a responsible way. It did not matter to me how the Prime Minister was handling the situation, because the best healthcare infrastructure to deal with COVID-19, especially a small, vulnerable economy like ours, is to avoid getting the virus and for us not to transmit it. I see developed countries with better healthcare systems than us being overwhelmed because there is a certain capacity you can accommodate. All of that we are doing. And you know, Mr. Speaker, constituents of mine and people from all over were calling, saying, listen, the lockdown was not handled properly. And they complained that there was politics in the whole process of dealing with this matter on the part of the government. I wrote my second post asking them, notwithstanding those things, I'm appealing to them to stay at home, observe the protocol. And I gave two fundamental arguments in there. That if we stop the spread of COVID-19, we would be in a great position to reopen our country very quickly. And the reopening meant that we have taken care of it in our jurisdiction. We have purged ourselves from the virus. So anytime it is safe to open our borders, we would be in a position to do so. We did not have ventilators, we didn't have this, and we didn't have that. That was the essence of my contribution. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? UWPs took to Facebook and said all sorts of things because they believe the opposition has absolutely no right to speak. That on the 6th of June 2016, it does not matter what is happening in this country, that we do not have the right to speak. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what it's going to be. We are going to cooperate fully with the government and every other agency toward ensuring that we minimize infection, minimize transmission in the short term, and bring this thing under control where COVID-19 would be something of the distant past in our country. But you know, all the abuse on Facebook, I went and I looked out from the veranda of faith to those comments and the people who were encouraging that sort of activity, the poisoners of the well springs of public opinion. I said a prayer for them, Mr. Speaker. I pray that as we move more of our lives online, like trying to use ICT to educate our school children who cannot go to school at this particular point in time because we are dealing with a national emergency, that at some time they will use ICT in a productive fashion, not to malign people, not to attack people. And even at this point where people see others die, we are still engaged in useless political mischief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I said it's business as usual. Because all the time we come to this house and offer advice, offer guidance, we have been abused. Over the past 4 years, for example, Mr. Speaker, we have been in this house. We have been talking about the level of borrowing, for example, and what it would cause, and what we would get in return is abuse. What is well documented in this house, well documented during my press conferences and platform statements, Mr. Speaker, is captured in one of the press conferences that I spoke at last year. To be more precise, on Wednesday, 7th August 2019. And this particular statement is online, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to quote 3 important sections. This high debt to GDP ratio could have the following negative impacts on our country. Key investments in our future are at risk. Higher interest costs could crowd out important public investments that can fuel economic growth, priority areas like education and infrastructure. In addition, growing government debt reduces the amount of private capital for investments, which hurts economic growth and wages. A nation saddled with debt will have less to invest in its own future. Less flexibility to respond to crises. On our current path, we are at greater risk of fiscal crisis, and high amounts of debt leave us with much less flexibility to deal with unexpected events. It will be more difficult to work our way out. And the final point, protecting the essential safety net. Our unsustainable fiscal path threatens the safety net and most vulnerable in our society, our elderly, our children, our youth, the sick, the poor, the disabled or differently able. If our government does not have sufficient resources, these essential programs and those who need them most would be put in jeopardy. Unquote, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the point is, as a responsible opposition, we must always indicate to the government that a path is dangerous. We are a small, open, and vulnerable economy. We are locked in a narrow band of policy options, and we cannot be grabbing reckless policies from an expanding menu of dangerous policies. We must not do that. I remember, Mr. Speaker, that they're not taking advice on anything, including now we're fighting COVID-19. There is a very important thing. Right now we talk about food security. And I remember standing here and criticizing DSH, for example, and the amount of resources we were putting into DSH, like building a road for $13 million to accommodate T.Y. King and his foolishness. And I said, we must pay attention to sustainable agriculture and food security. I did indicate recently in this parliament as well, Mr. Speaker, that it is prognosticated that by 2050, the world's population will be about 9 billion people. And livestock production, etc., would be very important. And our ability to produce would be important. We do not know how supply chains will be disrupted. And I made that point. And therefore, we had to address the issue at home. Even the open space by the beach, with COVID-19, our patterns of socialization may change, Mr. Speaker. Instead of closed areas, we probably would venture more outdoors. Now, had you taken this thing and give it to T.Y. King to put Tikabuwe or whatever he was going to do on the beach, where would we recreate? How can we recalibrate in the aftermath of dealing with that particular pandemic? The HIA, the redevelopment, when we said, listen, we must not narrow space for fiscal maneuver. We need to keep those things at bay. That borrowing from Taiwan and borrowing from banks certainly are not the way to go. And not only the opposition that been tortured for honest opinion, not only members on this side who were tortured for honest opinion, professionals were attacked from the Medical and Dental Association.
Honorable member, no,
Mr. Speaker,
you need to bring, what we're dealing with is the extension of time. The extension of the...
That is what I'm dealing with. Mr. Speaker,
so
I told you...
I'm not here. You seem to be losing me there now. So let's get back. Continue, but I'm just letting you, you're losing me now with reference to the extension of the emergency.
I'm not losing any altitude. The matters that are important now, Mr. Speaker, to reach the most vulnerable and to be able to deliver to the people of this country, our economic immune system must not be compromised. And this is the point. The recovery of this country is contingent upon the immune system of the economy and of the social infrastructure of this country. That is the point. I spoke about COVID-19 in the context of outdoor with DSH, relevant to the debate. I spoke about sustainable agriculture and food security, relevant to this debate. And these are the pressing matters, not all this back and forth about you didn't support me or you did this or you did that. No, these are the crucial issues that the most vulnerable who are unemployed, and tell you, including the nice workers they fired that cannot get resources to take care of themselves. These are not political points, you know. These are the fundamental realities, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
And we must articulate those fundamental realities in this
Speaker, on a
House.
point of order. It has been established in this House, Mr. Speaker, that no nice workers were fired, that the nice workers had a contract for 3 years that came to an end and the contracts were not renewed. The member needs to withdraw that statement about nice workers being fired.
An honorable member, I don't have an issue where you want to take your debate. I try not to tell members what they should speak about, who they should respond to. That's not for me. I don't think it is for me to do. And yes, in all the points you may have some, when you talk about the immunity, economic immunity, and I have no issue with that. That's post-COVID. I don't have an issue with that. But we're talking about the extension of the emergency. So I need you to bring it into the extension of the emergency for me. That's all.
Of course. Mr. Speaker, we were discussing that, but I'm responding to the debate. Members opposite opened all the doors and they were allowed to have the latitude and, according to Honorable Cecile, the longitude to say whatever they wanted and attack the opposition on this particular matter. So, Mr. Speaker...
No, I'm not saying you're not supposed to respond. I'm saying if you're responding, always do it with what is before us. And right now, you're not giving me that impression. You own that.
Mr. Speaker, I will lock onto the radial. I will lock onto the radial by saying to you that both the member for Cassie Southeast and the member for Ancillary Canries did say that they were handling things so nicely that they moved from Victoria Hospital into OKU with lightning rapidity. Mr. Speaker, all that says is that what the Prime Minister for almost 4 years was saying that was impractical and impossible were possible all along, including moving to OKEU Hospital in record time. And these are the kind of games that we must stop in this country. And this is the appropriate time to speak about matters like this. You know, there was nothing stopping the government for almost 4 years ago to move into OKEU Hospital. But COVID-19, we could have moved with lightning rapidity. And also, this period exposes the myth that St. Jude's is not completed today because the former Prime Minister did not complete St. Jude's. Mr. Speaker, the former Prime Minister has nothing to do with not completing St. Jude's and spending millions on containers at the stadium. The former Prime Minister has nothing to do with millions of dollars being spent in the yard at St. Jude's, and now this monstrosity. He had nothing to do with that. In fact, had COVID-19, had he been Prime Minister, COVID-19 would have found both hospitals already in operation. And you know, Mr. Speaker, These are the difficult things that sometimes people accept. You see, not even COVID-19 has caused the honorable member for Miku South to be sober. Not even COVID-19 can cause him not to laugh at things that are important to the most vulnerable people in this country. And that's why I said it's a very sad and solemn occasion. But in keeping with COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, as I prepare to take my brief contribution to its logical conclusion, I did a post this morning, again, on COVID-19. And it's in relation to the 9th special emergency meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government that was held on the 15th of April, recently concluded, where at that meeting, heads tried to come together and agree on a few areas, like a common public health policy, issues related to food security, the building of a robust digital architecture to assist in the fight against the virus, the threats to security during the course of the pandemic, a collective approach to the international financial institutions in accessing assistance to meet the financial, fiscal challenges arising from the crisis, a protocol on reopening borders, which all member states would adhere to, and the transportation of people and goods by air and sea interregionally, with particular reference to the operations of the regional air carriers adversely affected by the measures adopted to contain the virus. And my response to that, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, given that tourism is considered the heartbeat of Caribbean economies, with tourism being in a coma due to the pandemic, in an effort to prevent the economies from going into cardiac arrest, the temptation to reopen our islands will always be high. However, reopening the countries prematurely carries the probability of greater community spread. While intermediate lockdowns may delay community spread in the short term, there is a real danger that massive community spread could overwhelm our already vulnerable healthcare systems, a luxury which we cannot afford. Further, there are other social and economic costs associated with lockdowns, especially repeated lockdowns, which could exacerbate our already high unemployment and poverty levels and could trigger widespread social unrest. The period ahead will be difficult to navigate, as it will require a delicate balance between public health imperatives, the demands of our people, and realistic attention to the economies. We cannot take decisions that will accelerate viral spread, but at the same time, we cannot allow our economies to move into cardiac arrest. This is not easy to achieve and requires a holistic response, at least by the hemispheric region, to create an improved framework to confront this challenge. Hence, it was commendable that in considering the way forward, the heads of government of CARICOM called for the lifting of sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela on humanitarian grounds, as all countries must be part of the global effort to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. First and foremost, lifting those sanctions will place both Cuba and Venezuela in a better position to care for their citizens. It is inhumane to sustain sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela, interfering with their ability to deliver much-needed services to their citizens, especially during pandemics like COVID-19. Notwithstanding the challenges, it is worthy of note that both countries continue to reach out to global citizens, irrespective of ideology, in our fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, Venezuela is currently facilitating COVID-19 testing equipment to some members of our CARICOM region. Hence, reviving the logic of the Cold War and using Venezuela as a laboratory for testing the new foreign policies of major geopolitical rivals is not a valid test in our fight against COVID-19. Despite the embargo, a relic of the Cold War, Cuba has historically assisted and continues to assist countries around the world, including St. Lucia, with doctors, nurses, and medicine to fight epidemics and pandemics such as Ebola and COVID-19. Second, with the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, the English-speaking Caribbean that we are part of experienced a change in the international context in which the states had existed. The global environment contained the seeds of our country's continued marginalization. Consequently, CARICOM states are increasingly seeking refuge in regional and sub-regional groupings as a basis for common action, and to create a better fiscal and developmental framework to match their basic needs with greater possibilities. In this regard, our CARICOM states have achieved favorable outcomes in hemispheric organizations such as the Community of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC and Alva. Via those arrangements, we were able to secure invaluable development support from Venezuela, which included laptops for secondary school students. The critical importance of ICT in our learning environment has now brought into sharp and urgent focus during this COVID-19 pandemic as we try moving a lot more of our lives online. For example, in our current effort to continue educating our students online while the school plant remains closed due to adherence to health protocols to contain the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And as I close, I said, finally, given that the CARICOM states exist in a world dominated by the most powerful state, imposing its influence and image on the weak and divided, and given CARICOM's strategic relations with North, South, and Central America, CARICOM must continue to utilize and emphasize with one voice diplomacy as a prime instrument for pursuing normalized relations among all states. CARICOM must continue its call for the resumption of the diplomatic reconciliation between the United States and Cuba, and for improved relations between the US and Venezuela, allowing for full-scale reconciliation of hemispheric relations, because all those unnecessary impediments to regional and hemispheric cooperation simply constitute a barrier to the further development of our countries in the said hemisphere, including undermining our ability to more effectively respond to pandemics in a coordinated way. And Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time, I will skip the portion on the World Health Organization and move to my concluding paragraph, which says that despite the best efforts by our governments, by the OECS, CARICOM, OAS, and WHO, the key to combating this pandemic is to avoid behaviors that will spread the virus. In the absence of a readily available vaccine, the components of the best health architecture in combating COVID-19 are physical, social distancing, good hygiene, staying at home as far as practicable, and observing the health protocols. Let us cooperate as a nation, region, hemisphere, and the world to fight and beat COVID-19, unquote. So, Mr. Speaker, we are always going to be in this parliament, and we are going to make our contribution. We know we are not in government, we do not control the public purse, but we can offer our guidance, because that is what we come to do in this house, to debate the course of government, to subject the taxation and other policies to critical examination. And at this point, we are at a very critical stage in our development, with COVID-19 threatening to lengthen a period where we are isolated, our tourism industry. We have to reform in the aftermath of COVID-19, and we must emerge a better people, that we can agree on the development agenda for the way forward, not on this papi show politics. You see people accusing the opposition when they speak. The opposition has every legitimacy to speak. We have been responsible in the handling of our affairs, Mr. Speaker, and we are going to continue to be responsible. If there is a day that we come to the Parliament and we believe in our soundness of judgment, things are in place, we are going to tell the Prime Minister that. If we believe that there are deficiencies we are going to say that. The Prime Minister is human. He's not perfect. We are human beings. So we are not seeking perfection from people and saying that they should not seek perfection from us. But apart from being human, there are certain things you must do. You must listen. You must listen and make the necessary adjustments and respect not just the opposition but professionals. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I must end by telling you that all we want is a country that would emerge intact in the turbulence of COVID-19. May God continue to bless our country, and I'm hoping that we record no deaths as we continue to recuperate and to end the spread in our country and for us to resume normal navigation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.